So, Mr. Mayor, why don't we start with you? You've actively spoken about how your AmeriCorps experience was fundamental not only to the person that you became, but also to launching you on this long-term path of public service. Was that something that you kind of expected going into your AmeriCorps experience, or were you sort of surprised to discover that you actually had a longer commitment than just a year or two to service?
Well, thank you, Chelsea, and good afternoon, everyone. I went into my year of service with AmeriCorps very much wanting to serve my country, but also my community. That's what I found so compelling about the AmeriCorps program. And I knew that I wanted to be someone who served my country, my community long term, but I really didn't see myself running for elected office. It was me over a series of years coming to see the power in the public and wanting to get involved directly in our democracy. So I made that transition from service to elected politics, and after one tough loss, I finally got the position that I desired, and it's been very rewarding. It's tough, but the lessons that I learned as an AmeriCorps member, the value of working with people in a very personal way, that's definitely served me well as a local elected official.
Well, my father lost his first election too, as you may or may not know, and things worked out okay for him. So hopefully that is an instructive story. Bethany, congratulations on finishing your AmeriCorps service. Oh yeah, please, lots of applause for Bethany. How do you talk to your friends about your service experience? And are many of your friends thinking about doing AmeriCorps or going into service, or are you kind of unique in that regard?
So it's kind of difficult to talk to your friends about AmeriCorps, particularly since I'm affiliated with Hands On Atlanta, and most people tend to think of Hands On Atlanta as just a one-time weekend event volunteer organization. So when I tell them that I spend my whole year volunteering, it doesn't quite click. So I'll tell them that technically I'm a volunteer and I receive a monthly stipend. And so I'm in the schools for about 9, almost 10 hours a day, essentially volunteering at the schools and tutoring other students. When they hear that, I don't necessarily think that that inspires an urge to go out and serve. I really don't. However, I honestly feel like my experience at Hands On Atlanta has just been incredible. And it's really inspired in me a clear desire to continue pursuing education and to continue to be involved in education just because it's clarified a need that needs to be addressed. And I think that without Hands On Atlanta, it's really hard to just really focus when you see so many issues that need to be addressed. Hands On Atlanta kind of is a filter. This is where you go, where you want to volunteer and where you see a need that needs to be fulfilled. And for me, it definitely was that filter. But it wasn't a filter for just a day, it was a filter for really the rest of my life. So I almost feel like because of my experience at Hands On Atlanta, I want to serve those who I feel like are underserved in terms of education or who are underprivileged, who are living in underprivileged communities. So I don't necessarily feel like my friends personally would be inspired by that, but I know that I'm inspired by that.
Well, yes. Well, I do think authentic inspiration is infectious. So even if your story and your experience maybe has fallen on some deaf ears for your friends, I hope that you'll keep showing up in forums like this, and I hope that you'll keep talking to whomever will listen, because I have no doubt that you'll continue to inspire lots of people. We often do think of service as only the ways in which the mayor is serving, or your grandfather has served, or my parents has served. Maybe we think of military service, but service clearly has an almost limitless definition determined by how each individual can make a contribution to his or her communities. And although Bethany may have been with Hands On Atlanta volunteering, and the mayor is clearly serving in a public service capacity, you've chosen to serve more in an artistic capacity and kind of through your filmmaking. Can you talk a little bit about why you were drawn to being a documentary filmmaker and kind of why you have felt so strongly that's your way to serve?
I think similar to Bethany's experience, where as a young man, I know me and my friends during our holiday period would sit around at home quite bored and looking for ways to consume our time. And it took an experience and a visit to a local head clinic in South Africa, where we volunteered to work with some kids that had traumatic head injuries. And I guess that summer, spending time with these young men transformed the way I thought about how I could impact the world. I'd always been passionate about wanting to tell stories, and I'd always, for a long time, thought that they had to be these kind of huge blockbuster type films. But then I found, I guess, a unique way to start showcasing other people's voices through using film as a medium. And this recent film that I did, it's called Beyond Right or Wrong, focuses on doing that. We look at conflict issues in 3 different cases around the world. One is the Rwanda genocide, the other is Northern Ireland and the British conflict there, and then we look at Israel and Palestine. And in each case, we take someone that's had a heinous tragedy perpetrated against them, and we bring them together with the person that perpetrated that crime. And we're trying to find a way for these two to have dialogue and for both sides to understand each other a little bit more. And I think for us, that was a unique experience to show how you can be of service to a community at large by using a medium that often is not perceived to have that type of power.
I think that's tremendously important. I think it's hard for all of us to imagine what we can't see. And I think, Bethany, by you being a consistent, constant presence in the classroom, you probably helped so many kids realize that there were other people beyond their teachers who were investing in them. And that is a profound gift that maybe just seemed to be your 9 or 10 hours a day, but that will have lifelong ripples across the students you interacted with. Mr. Mayor, one of the kind of real genius dimensions of AmeriCorps is that it is a local-national hybrid, that sort of local communities articulate what their needs are, and then AmeriCorps kind of has a constellation of Corps members against those needs across our country. What do you think really is the role of local government beyond AmeriCorps in ensuring that kind of everyone in your city who wants to contribute can find a meaningful opportunity, whether that's for a Saturday or a year or longer?
I'm glad you've been such a champion of expanding national service, because that's become very important to me as I've learned how many people in my own community are asking for opportunities to serve, and not just serve in an extracurricular way on top of something that they're doing, but as a full-time year at least. Some, like those in the audience, will find their way into this as a career. So we have a necessity of advocating, I think, for the expansion in national service. I think that's one thing that local governments need to be able to do apart from political or partisan lines. As the program was originally created, we have to go back to promoting it as something that's really good for the entire country and good for our local communities. The other thing that we're doing through our Cities of Service Coalition that I've been privileged to be a partner of is we're looking at how all the variety of different national service and volunteer programs are adding up and layering and leveraging on top of each other. And as we want to expand national service, I think that role is going to become even more important, because national and community service will have an even greater impact on our local communities, and we don't want that to become disjointed or competitive. We want it to be cooperative and aligned with priorities in Flint. That's education and eliminating blight and improving our natural landscape and waterways. So local governments, I think, have an important role in those two ways, advocating and also coordinating and working to align service at the local level. Because without that, we could end up in a situation where we're starting to, in some cases, do more harm than good, which would defeat the enterprise.
I agree with that. We certainly need to ensure that every service opportunity is equally meaningful for the person engaged in service and for the community being served and impacted. Bethany, returning to what you were saying earlier about kind of your friends' disinterest or reticence to think about service, I think one of the reasons I find that challenging to understand is given how many young people across our country are underemployed, unemployed, or not in kind of full-time education. And that service, again and again, has proven to be a viable pathway to long-term employment, not only kind of through a arguably more traditional arc like the mayor, but that increasingly companies, whether Cisco or JP Morgan, are saying they disproportionately value service when they're looking at resumes for prospective employees, because they know that that says that the applicant is likely to be resilient, to be a leader, to have good team working skills, all fundamentals to success in many different corporate environments. So do you think your friends just haven't made that type of connection yet, or do you think it's because they don't sort of have enough role models for whom service has propelled them further in a career that they might aspire to?
I'll be perfectly honest. I do
That's
not
good.
know.
We like candor. This is an intimate environment. You're not going to tell anyone what Bethany said.
So I'm not quite sure if at this point I've even made that connection yet. Because one of the reasons that I applied for AmeriCorps is because I've been tutoring since I've been about 15 years old, and I was passionate about education, and I was passionate about tutoring children, particularly in math. So for me, I was following my passion, not necessarily having this broad idea that I wanted to serve a community, but I was following my passion. I think with many people my age, as you've alluded to, they have a lot of pressing issues, such as underemployment, college loans, things of that nature. And so I think that many people my age almost view volunteerism as a luxury that they cannot afford. So it's not a top priority. It's not one of the most pressing concerns in their minds. And if they have the opportunity to do it, well, it's almost as if they have to schedule time in their lives to do it. It's not a lifestyle. It's not a commitment. I do think that might change if they see that link between service and employment, but I don't think that it's a link that's been firmly established. So we still have people just thinking that service is an isolated thing. And even for myself, I felt that way as well. I'd be like, I'll sign up for Hosea Feed the Hungry, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and so forth. It wasn't until I became a member of AmeriCorps that I saw service as a lifestyle. And I think that you have to really have that transformative experience in order to realize that.
Well, Bethany, you have your own cheering section, which I think is awesome. And what you said is really important because for those of us who really do not only kind of have the conviction, but know that that conviction is backed up by real data and evidence that service can be a path toward long-term employment, as well as helping to ensure that our children are better educated, that our communities are healthier and safer. We need to do a better job of telling those stories and ensuring that that data is well understood, which then leads me to a question for all of you, but maybe our documentarian can comment first. Kind of technology is often treated as a panacea. How do you think kind of technology, whether social media or otherwise, can really help ensure that people understand what service can mean to them, not only on a personal basis today and not only for their communities today or tomorrow, but for their lives? How can we do a better job of telling these stories so that kind of Bethany's friends aren't as surprised by the choice that she's made?
I think a huge part of that is having more conversations take place around what service actually helps us engage it, and how people can use this to benefit their lives. I think for a lot of the younger generation, they don't communicate this enough ultimately, and it's not something they want to showcase on their social media personalities or personas. And so finding a way to make it more accessible for them to engage with organizations that are obviously here, and organizations that have a clear track record in working with young people, at the same time making it something that they want to participate and share their voices in, I think is a huge thing.
Mr. Mayor, what do you think about that? Since you're nodding, I think you probably have something to say.
Well, the technology tools have been tremendous for us in telling stories, what's happening in Flint, and broadcasting that. But at the same time, I still, and this may be my bias as a local mayor, but I think there's a tremendous need for the face-to-face, hand-to-hand, eye-to-eye communication, and that may be finding better stories that then we can tell and broadcast in those broad ways, but it's also just about really rooting this in people's lives, and it not being about a cause, as important as that can be, but truly changing the conditions of communities and quality of life. And I think we're being followed here with the panel on the civil rights legacy. And I mean, that movement wasn't just about the philosophy of civil rights and equality and justice. It was about a child being able to go to a school and get an equal education. And we need to continue to think about service in that way, that it's about changing people's lives. And that gives us great stories to tell with the wonderful technology tools we have.
Bethany, you mentioned the student loan debt that so many of your friends are struggling with, and that then so many of your friends' families are also struggling with, because student loan debt isn't only kind of denominated by the student, but is kind of the responsibility of his or her family. And in 2013, we saw for the first time outstanding student loan debt outpace outstanding credit card debt in our country. Sort of an ignominious label for 2013. I feel badly for 2013. We now have $1.2 trillion of outstanding student loan debt in our country. And most of those are actually federally financed or federally guaranteed student loans. And so one of the things that we've increasingly felt at the Clinton Foundation is that we need to do a better job of linking the service conversation with the student loan conversation. And we're starting to see real leadership from the president on income kind of repayment rates being graduated, and on kind of people who are working in public schools, for example, after 10 years being qualified for immediate and total student loan forgiveness. But service should also be part of that, I think, whether through AmeriCorps or working for the mayor of Flint. If that does happen, which hopefully will happen, do you think that would change kind of your friends' mindsets? Do you think more young people that might be willing to see then service as a potential lifestyle, as you put it, or career?
Most definitely. Instead of those 6 to 8 times as many applicants, it'll be 10 to 20. So there will definitely be more applicants to these programs, and I definitely think that many students will start to see the connection between service and, I guess, their self-interest. The only thing that I would wonder if that connection were made is that when you apply to these programs, do you want people to apply because they believe in that cause? Or do you want people to apply because they see like their self-interest being boosted by applying to these programs? So I definitely think it's a great motivator, but I'm just cautious because I don't want the true purpose of service to be distorted, trying to lure the youth into these programs by promising, okay, your debt will be repaid, or you'll get a bonus if you do X, Y, and Z.
Well, I think that is a great sort of existential question that kind of the service movement has struggled with for a long time. I mean, is it really ultimately about the quality of service or the quality of intention. I can't believe that we're out of time. I feel like that went way too quickly. I hope that you all feel more emboldened and inspired, certainly by Bethany's story, but also by the various ways that our panelists are choosing to serve their communities and, by definition, our global community. I certainly am more inspired. I hope that you'll give all of our panelists one more round of applause, and thank you for your attention.